Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing, Stacy?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Well, that's always good.
Absolutely. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about your son?
Sure. Like starting where?
Well, let's start about what kind of a kid he was, or adult he was, or
Um, he was a great kid. He was a mama's boy. But there came a time when we got separated when he was a teenager. For like financial reasons and to survive, I had to move to Arizona to take a job. And he stayed back there because his dad had we had joint custody, but his dad was considered the residential parent. Um, so I brought him out here that first summer. He was 15 and a half, and he wanted to stay with me because he was a mama's boy, but his dad wouldn't let him. So he ended up having to go back to Ohio, which I wanted to bring him out as often as I could. But when he got back there, he was dealing with a lot, from being separated from me and everything. And he kind of fell in with a bad crowd, you know. So the next time that I wanted to bring him out, he didn't want to come out because he was tied up with these kids that he had gotten tied up with, and they were starting to get into trouble. So and then he met a girl, so he didn't want to leave because of that. Um, Eventually, he ended up in prison due to by then he had gotten into heroin and drugs like that, and he ended up in prison for a few years due to robbing places and things like that to get drug money. By then he was like 19, and I hadn't seen him since that time. I brought him out when he was 15. He served those few years in prison, and he got out. Uh, they caught him using drugs, so he violated, and he had to go back to serve the rest of his terms, which was it was less than 6 months. Um, but he did really good in there, and when he got out, um, it was he got out on November 7th on my daughter's birthday, and then by um, December
how
30th,
did he
he
pass
passed
away again?
away. We assumed at the time he was at his dad's house. He had been at a party with family with his girlfriend, his daughter's mother, and they were at a family party, and she dropped him off at his dad's because that's where he wanted to go. His dad was in bed and didn't even know he was there. But apparently, after the girlfriend dropped him off, he went and got drugs somewhere by himself because his best friend that he usually used with was in jail at the time. So he went and got drugs somewhere and was found the next morning when his dad came down to use the restroom. He was found in the bathroom, and he was already gone. We assumed that it was, a heroin overdose. That there's drug paraphernalia on the floor. He's gone. We just assumed that he had either overdosed on heroin or got something with fentanyl or something like that. Um, so we pretty much knew it was some kind of an OD. But I ended up having to wait for the toxicology, which ended up taking way longer than it should have because they couldn't identify the drug at first. They looked for heroin. They looked for all the opiates. Everything that's usually associated with an overdose, and they kept coming up empty. So they had to keep going with the toxicology tests until they finally got the right drug, which ended up being a drug called carfentanil. And it's basically an elephant tranquilizer, and there is no application for this drug in humans. So somehow his drugs had that carfentanil in them, and he obviously didn't know this.
Did they catch the man who sold it to him, or he got it from?
Um, as of now, no. They this happened in Sandusky, Ohio. Um, and they don't even seem real concerned about it because they did take his phone to see if they could identify, who sold it to him. But every time I call them, because I want the phone back, when they're done with it. And every time I call them, and this has been over a year now, mind you, they tell me, oh, well, we only have one specialist that, deals with the phone, and he's in Cleveland, which Cleveland's a big city. And we haven't gotten to that phone yet. So chances of them actually catching the guy for this are slim to none. Because by the time they do, obviously he's not going to have any of that drug anymore. They may be able to catch him for, possession or with intent to sell or something like that. But for what happened to my son, it's very doubtful that anything will ever come of that.
Well, you would think that they would have like somebody that could take the case. And if that city or that county can't take the case, you should be able to like transfer it to the county or the city that you live in now, because I don't really believe that it should be like, oh well, our city's too big, let's not worry about that one particular case.
No, that's not actually the problem. There is a detective that's assigned to the case, and the case is in Sandusky, Ohio, in the town where he died. It's just that they don't have their own expert that can do the phone, that can get into the phone and get the information from the phone. They have to send it up to Cleveland, which Cleveland is a big city, and they've got, murderers. They've got, so this phone has to like wait in line behind what they consider like more pressing cases. So it's more that we just kind of got shoved to the back of the line, basically.
Did they say like how the drug dealer would even like get something like that? Like, I mean, that's not something you just go and buy at a supermarket or anything like that, like your normal drugstore.
From what they can tell, mostly, because I did some research on this drug, because I'd never heard of it. So I wanted to know more about what it was and, how they could have gotten it. From what I can find out, most of like even the bigger zoos and stuff only keep just minuscule amounts of it. What they do is they get it usually from China. It comes over from China and then is dispersed all over. And I am going to say another thing that I learned about this drug is that this guy that dealt this stuff out, a guy, woman, whoever it was, they had to have known that this was lethal stuff. Because carfentanil is different than fentanyl or any other drug, because it can be absorbed through touch, through skin. And if you have a dog and your dog gets a sniff of like 2 grains of this from across the room, it will kill your dog. So they had to have taken some kind of extra precautions around this stuff, because you can't even touch it. And if they had touched it, they would have OD'd themselves. So they had to have known that there was something else in that drug to handle it more carefully.
But you would think that, like, that's not something that, like, you should be able to pinpoint kind of where it would be coming in from, because I've never heard of anybody really dying of that. Not saying that a lot of people aren't dying from it. I just haven't heard it from over here.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of people. I have on the Facebook groups, I have ran across a few other moms, whose son was a victim of the same drug, but there hasn't been many. It's just a handful of us. But I do know that in places like Cleveland, they had this was the drug that was causing like 100 ODs in 24 hours.
Well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
When you first messaged me about it, I was like, I never heard of anybody dying over something like that. But, I really don't know anybody that's actually, overdose.
And when I called, when I kept calling the coroner's office to get, the drug results, she was telling me that, because this was in 2019, when I was still waiting for the results. And I would call her and she would go, it's really funny because I've got several other cases that are from, 2018 that haven't come back yet either. And I don't know what's going on here. It turns out that those other cases were also carfentanil. So they probably came from the same place.
So it's probably definitely from that same area then.
Yeah, it was the same town.
I don't know. I just feel like the case sounds like a lot more bigger than it's being put out as.
I think part of the problem is that I am in Arizona and my son was in Ohio. And I am really the only one that's like pushing for anything. His dad and, his sister and them are like, well, he died of an overdose. He's gone. There's nothing we can do. But he didn't, yes, he did go and do drugs, but he didn't do this with the intention to die. You know what I mean? And I feel like without telling him, hey, this has got blah, blah, blah in it, that to me, that's tantamount to murder. And I'm the only one pushing this. And so, like, when I call, they have the ability to not take my phone call, or he's out of the office, or whatever the case may be, and I'm the only one making phone calls for this. So and I don't think that they've had any more carfentanil deaths since then that I know of there. So I think maybe they figure this is it was kind of a fluke. It happened and it's over and done with.
Yeah. It also seems like the father is kind of dealing it with a different way. Not saying that his way is, better than yours or yours is better than his. But, I mean, I totally believe that people are going to deal with things their own way. And I think that, in his mind, he's probably thinking, he's gone and I kind of just want to, move on. I don't want to be depressed about it. But
well, he's also the one that found him, so he sees that image in his mind every time he thinks of our son,
Yeah. And for a parent who has watched their son, take, their last breath, it's something that does stick with you. And it's something that if you can, I don't want to say move on because you're never going to move on from it. Find something that, takes the pain away just a little bit or takes the thought away just a little bit, then, that's probably what he's doing. He probably doesn't want to keep pushing because he probably doesn't want to get reminded of it every single day.
Yeah, that's probably true. We don't talk about it a whole lot. He's kind of closed off when it comes to that. Because he also found his brother when he was 16. His brother committed suicide in their house, and he was the one that found his brother. So he kind of shuts himself off from death. He's been through a lot, so he does definitely deal with it differently.
Yeah, I could say that I could totally feel for this guy. I mean, I've never met him, never seen him, but just finding your brother and then years later finding your kid, that's just. I think he should have every right not to say nothing or want to know the truth. He probably just wants to remember his son, just as this little boy that he had. So, are you doing anything like counseling or anything like that to get help or?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because my mother had 5 kids, and out of the 5 of us, 4 of us have now lost a child. My youngest sister was the first to lose her child back in 2014. And then in 2018 was my son. My sister and I both live here in Arizona. And when I lost my son, it brought us that much closer because we had both experienced the same thing, She, at the time, for these 4 years since her son passed, had been going to different counselors, and she couldn't find anybody that could relate or that could help her because very few of them have been through the loss that we have been through. So she kind of gave up on that, and I never even tried to pick it up because, like I said, we live in the same, state and everything, and where she was going for counseling would be where I would be going for counseling. You know what I mean? And if they couldn't help her, they're not going to be able to help me.
Yeah, I had a caller. I don't know if you watched my last show or not. I had
I did.
yeah. So when she was saying that she doesn't want to go to counseling or therapy because unless you lost a child, they're not really gonna know the pain or the feeling. So how are they gonna help you? And I sat on that for a little bit, and I have to say I agree with her. I'm not I don't have any college degrees or anything like that in that area. Um, so that's one of the reasons why I haven't seek help. I did try depression medication. I just didn't really feel like it was doing anything for me. Not saying that it won't do anything for anybody else, but uh, I don't always know
Yeah,
that a therapist can help somebody who's lost a child, and if they can, then kudos to them. But I know for me, it wouldn't help.
yeah. I mean, what is there that anybody can do for you in that situation? There's really nothing, you know. And I personally knew that this was something that I needed to feel and get through and deal with, because if not, I didn't want to be 2 years down the road and end up like picking up the bottle and becoming like a drunkard or something like that. You know, I knew this was something that I had to face and deal with. When my son died, I got the phone call, and this is terrible for me to have to look back on, because the time zone is different. Here in Arizona, it was 3 hours earlier, so it was, and I'm not a morning person, and it was 8:03 in the morning when I got the call, and I got out of bed and stumbled over to my phone because it was on the charger, and I remember on the way over to the phone going, "Man, somebody calling me this early, somebody better be dead."
Oh yeah, I think we've all said that though.
And then I picked up that phone, and it was my son's girlfriend screaming, "Tyler's dead, Tyler's dead." And I had just got done saying, "Somebody better be dead to be calling me this early." So that was a hard thing to deal with. And then it was really hard for me to deal with the fact that my son was 25 when he died. I had not seen him physically since he was, and hugged him since he was a 15-year-old boy. We talked, we FaceTimed, when he was in prison, we had, video visits, things like that. But it wasn't the same as, hugging him and, just being with him. So I had a lot to deal with, but luckily, I had been in the behavioral health field for 15 years, and so had most of my family members. So I was better equipped to cope, I guess you could say, than a lot of people.
Do you really think that actually helped you cope? I mean, I just can't see, like, I can see dealing with death in a different way. Like, if you're a nurse and you see it every day with like children and just adults in general, I guess it's easier to see somebody else's kid pass away, but your own kid, I still can't imagine that it helped you cope.
It did to an extent, because it gave me some tools that I could use, like some coping mechanisms and some coping skills that I could use. Just the biggest thing though was just reminding myself to breathe. And it can be really hard because I'm alone. I have 2 dogs and I live alone. All my family is gone except my sister, and she lives about 2 hours away. So the biggest part for me was trying to stay out of my own head, which is really hard when you're alone all the time.
Yeah, I can see how that can be hard. I I'm lucky enough not to be alone. I have somebody else to talk it out with, even though sometimes it feels like when we do talk it out, it just makes things worse. I know I'm the type of person that I don't want to talk it out, so I'm lucky to have that person to talk to if I wanted to, but I always find something else to do. Like I'll work out a couple hours. I have this whole thing right here going on. I just try to keep my mind busy.
Honestly, my sister has been the best help throughout this, because we can relate to each other. You know, we recognize the same feelings in each other. So when I get really, really low, that's who I call. I call my sister. and immediately she understands, and so she's been the biggest help. But also my brother, because like I said, 4 of my mom's 5 kids have, lost a child now. I was the second. My oldest brother came third about 4 months after my son died. His daughter died. And she was an overdose also. And just last month, my other brother lost his daughter. She wasn't an overdose, but her death was drug related because of all the years that she had done drugs. So now my oldest brother and I, we connect more. So my brother and sister have been instrumental in helping me get through this because they know the loss. Also, I have a really good friend named Carol, and she has been a rock way more than any family that I've had. Because the morning that I called her, and told her that my son passed away, she came right over to my house. Like I said, I have these dogs, and I had to go to Ohio. So it was her and her family that took care of my dogs for almost a month while I, drove to Ohio and, got everything taken care of and, finally got back home. And so much has happened, since then. My mom has passed away, just, a lot of things. And if it weren't for those 3 people, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now, I don't think.
Well, that's good that you had that love and that support from people who not only is your sister, but, you have friends that who are like your family who stepped up when they did.
Yes, and I'm so grateful. But this has definitely been a rough journey. Your son passed away, correct?
Yes, he did.
How old was he?
He was 9 months old.
Oh, he was just a baby.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. He had heart problems, and he's been through about 8 surgeries. I think it was 8 or 9 surgeries. Some were heart. He was born without an anus. So
wow.
So we weren't. When I actually got the call about him having heart problems, she was still pregnant, and we had no idea. We were actually in our city, and they were like, "Hey, we got a phone call from a different city, like 30 minutes away, or 30 minutes to about an hour away," and they had said, "Hey, we're here with the special imaging, heart place. We want to make sure that your son's okay." And we were like, "What? What are you talking about?" Like, yeah, your hospital didn't tell you that they think they found something wrong with the baby, and we're like, no. So when we did find out, that was a shock. But the hardest part about the whole process was all we came down to was like, he's gonna be okay. He's gonna live probably well past his 30s. It's kind of how heart patients, it's kind of how it works. It went from that to all the way up to, he's not gonna make it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I still have 2 other sons that, going back and forth to the hospital and doing all that stuff. So it got challenging. We made it work, and we cherished every moment that we had with him.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, but sounds like he was definitely loved.
He's still loved. The love never's gone away. I mean, we think about him every single day. I don't think that there's a day that goes by that we don't even talk about him. Some people will say that, well, don't you guys need time to heal? And our way, I guess that is how we heal, is we talk about it. And
everybody heals in different ways, Yeah. My Tyler he was my rainbow baby. I had lost a baby when I was 7 months pregnant, and then he was the baby that came along, after. So he was my rainbow baby. So I've kind of been through both ends of losing a child, even though my one was stillborn and never took a breath, you still carry that child and, grieve that loss, So when Tyler came along, of course I was overjoyed, but I was terrified too when I was pregnant with him, because what if something should happen, But to have him for 25 years, I was blessed to be his mama, and I miss him every day.
We had, I think we had a miscarriage before we had our middle child. So we kind of gone through, like, losing it, and, put all that time and the love and the effort of being excited about, oh, we're going to have another kid. And then when we had Tyler Anthony, he, you know, he took a lot of the pain away, and then we were really excited about Alexander, the one that who had passed away. And when he passed away, it kind of shut us all down. It's like one of those things, like, you know, we talked about having another kid, but then we also talked about not having another kid because we're scared that something might happen. I know that she wanted another one more than, you know, I did, just because, you know, I definitely don't want to have to go through being in hospitals and go through all that anxiety and that depression. I was told by a lot of people, you know, just if you want another one, try for another one, and that baby will be loved. And it's not that it won't be loved or he or she won't be loved. It's just the fact that, you know, I don't want that what if and something bad to happen all over again, because I don't think I could really take it.
I totally understand. And, you know, when my son died, I was like 47, 46. So, you know, I couldn't even consider having more kids or anything, you know, by that stage, you know, and I can't honestly say, yeah, I think I can, that the loss of my son was definitely worse than the loss of the baby, because I'd had my son for 25 years. You know what I mean? And I knew him. He got to grow up, you know, and we got to share memories. But with the baby, I didn't really have any. You know what I mean? And, you know, not to lessen that loss, you know, but it didn't devastate me like the loss of my son did.
Yeah, absolutely. If your son was still here, would you do? What would you try differently? Because I know that. I mean, you would do something differently, or you would say something differently, knowing what you know now.
You know, I've obviously I've thought about this because we all do, you know. Um, I would have to say, when I told you that I was in the behavioral health field, I was actually part of that time I spent in mental health, but part of that time I spent in substance abuse. And me and my son had talked about it many times, you know, because of course I knew he was an addict. He knew that that's helping people that were addicts is what I did for a living, you know. So we had many good talks, you know, and I was able to tell him everything that I would have told any other addict that I interacted with, you know, because I was able to go into like work mode a bit. Plus, I was able to connect with him a bit more because he was my child, you know, and you know, he fully understood, you know, what could happen, that one day he could get a hold of something that had, you know, fentanyl in it. You know, we talked about this, you know, he knew. So I can't really think of or say that there's anything different that I could have done. We were in the making plans of for him to come out here with me for a while. For him to, you know, get away from that area, get away from, you know, people that he used with, and, you know, just have a new start for a while, you know, get clean and everything. But this ended up happening before we could bring those plans to fruition.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't realize is when people are doing drugs, sometimes there's not really a lot that, you know, anybody else could do because they don't want to get the help. You know, it's hard to force somebody to.
Yeah, until they're ready, there's nothing you can do, you know. And come to find out, what I found out when I went there, you know, and we were making the funeral arrangements, his friend that was in jail at the time, let it be known that my son, like in like the month that he was out of prison and before he died, had overdosed twice during that time. Now, I do wish that someone had told me that. I wish that I had known that, because obviously my son did not tell me that. If somebody had told me that, I would have made things more imminent, and I would have probably went to him, and, you know, because once I got there, I'm pretty sure that he would have came with me. You know, if I could have, you know, gotten there to take his hand. So that is one regret that I do kind of have, is that nobody told me about this at the time that it happened. So maybe there could have been, you know, some kind of an intervention.
And what about his friend though? Is his friend still doing drugs, or did it give him a wake up call, or?
That's the best thing about this, is that I feel that my son did not die in vain, because obviously, you know, like I said, his friend was in prison. This was his best friend that he had been, you know, hanging with for like 10 years. This was one of the kids that he got with when he went home from being with me. The kid was in jail, and they got him on Vivitrol, which is a shot, that kind of blocks opioid receptors. So he didn't have like the cravings and things, and he was able to, I don't want to say beat his addiction, but he's doing very well now. And he's got almost a year and a half clean and sober. And that is all due to my son and what happened to my son.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a huge believer in, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, me too. And it's, and to me, I couldn't be more proud that my son, at least saved one life. That meant that his death was not in vain, and that, it meant something, that he made a change.
That's still good. I mean, with the bad, there is still some good. So, I mean, that's awesome.
That was the rainbow in the clouds, in this whole situation. I was just so grateful, and every time I talk to Robert or hear from Robert, he's still doing good and getting better every day, so, and it's, he credits my son and my son's death, for this happening.
That's awesome. And I'm also happy that you could see it in that point of view, and that you're not like mad at him for, if you guys would not be doing drugs. I mean, there's still a lot of people out there that would just still find the hate in it all and not the positive.
I went back and forth. I did have a little bit of those feelings in the beginning, but I also knew, with my experience being in the substance abuse field, I knew that my son had made his own decisions, and he, just like him choosing to use there by himself when his using buddy, I guess you could call him, was in jail. My son made that final fatal decision, to do what he did. And there was nobody that I could blame for that, except for the choice that he made.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you are welcome. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And anytime that you need to talk or vent, I'm on that page. You have my Facebook information. Don't be a stranger, and hopefully we could talk some more and, tell everybody about the show, and hopefully people like and subscribed, and hopefully that, we could help out at least one person today, and, don't do drugs. I mean, it's that simple. I know that they've been drilling that in kids' heads for years, and, hopefully your story does wake somebody else up.
That's all I can hope for.
Absolutely. Well, you have a wonderful day, and I hope that, life gets a little bit better for you.
Thank you. Same to you and your family.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys for listening today. Please like and subscribe. I do have more people that I will be talking to later on. Hope everybody has a wonderful day, and I hope this is, a wake-up call to some.